Zimbabwe's harmonised elections are on the horizon following President Emmerson Mnangagwa's announcement that elections will be held before the 26th of August. The ruling ZANU-PF government has been in power since independence 43 years ago, a period marred in economic hardship over the last decade and a half. Tonight we're joined by Dr. George Karekwaivanane, a senior lecturer in the Centre of African Studies at the University of Edinburgh in Scotland. Dr. Karekwaivanane is an expert in the fields of law and politics with a particular focus on Zimbabwean politics. He's also the author of the book, The Struggle Over State Power in Zimbabwe Law and Politics since 1950. George, very good evening. Appreciate your time tonight. Talk to us about your general assessment of the political situation in Zimbabwe in the lead up to this year's upcoming elections.
Thank you, Hugo. I guess my key point is that there are a number of worrying signs. I think what we've been seeing, especially since even last year with the by-elections, we've been seeing a lot of political violence being directed against opposition supporters. And sometimes even their lawyers are being brutally attacked. And one of the things that we're also seeing is that the opposition parties are being blocked from campaigning in certain rural areas. And in some cases, for example, in February, dozens of opposition party rallies were banned by the police. Other things that we're seeing, for example, is that the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission, even after lawsuits, it has refused to release an electronic version of the voters' roll and has charged very expensive charges for a physical voters' roll. My understanding is that the charge is about $187,000 to get the physical copy, which is not very helpful because it can't be audited. And even when you move to things like the delimitation report that was produced by the Zimbabwean Electoral Commission, a lot of analysts have looked at it and found that it has many errors. Some wards are missing. Thousands of voters have been moved to wrong wards. And in some cases, there are actually fake coordinates in there, where places that are supposed to be in Zimbabwe have coordinates that have no, connection to Zimbabwe. So what you have is really a delimitation report that is in shambles, really. And when you look at all these factors, you can't help but come up with the conclusion that things are not really in a proper state to be going for an election in Zimbabwe. So my assessment really is that the conditions at the moment are not suitable to go for an election.
Well, SADC sent a team. In fact, the Election Advisory Council has been in Zimbabwe the last few days. They said they will issue a report in a couple of weeks. Can we expect this report to pick out some of the things that you mentioned now?
This is the hope that they would do that. But in the past, what we've seen is that whether it's SADC or the AU, they've not really held the Zimbabwean government's feet to the fire. They generally tend to be very, they tiptoe around certain things and they're very diplomatic in their language. And this is really tragic because ideally what you want to have is that you want to have African leaders, African politicians holding each other to account rather than have, Western governments coming to critique African elections. So ideally we would like SADC to really hold the government's feet to the fire and point out these things that are very evident. You don't really have to, dig very deep to find out that there are many problems with the Zimbabwean, electoral environment. And one would hope that, SADC is going to have the courage to point out these things and not to tiptoe around things that are self-evident when you look at the Zimbabwean situation.
So let's talk about ZANU-PF's track record. How do you think a ruling party's record of power will affect their chances of winning this year's elections?
I think one of ZANU-PF's big weaknesses has been the economy. The economy really is in a shambles. Inflation is at its highest point. It's one of the highest in the world. I think year-on-year inflation in February was around 92% or something like that, which is extremely high, even though by Zimbabwean standards, given our history, it might not seem to be very high. So that's really a sign that the government is not managing things properly. Normally, even after COVID, you'd expect inflation to be in single digits, because of the Ukraine war and everything, but to have it around close to 100%, because in year-on-year in July it was about 101%. That is a clear sign of economic mismanagement, and this is translating into people's lives in the form of, people are struggling to meet their basic needs. People can't actually buy food. If you look every day, recently there's been talk about prices of, for example, a packet of rice becoming, beyond anyone's affordability. And so those are the kind of things that you see that ZANU-PF is really going to struggle when it comes to the economy. And when you look at things like, the social environment, you go to hospitals, there's no medicine. In some hospitals, you might find that there isn't any water even. But if you go outside, the hospital executives, they parked very fancy cars. And so you have these basic things that ZANU-PF is failing to deliver when it comes to the economy and people's social welfare. And that is really a damning aspect of their record. And in any country, if there was to be a free and fair election in Zimbabwe, it's likely that a government would really be punished for failing to deliver in these ways. And even when you look at the Gold Mafia documentary that was produced by Al Jazeera, it really revealed what people have suspected for a long time, that there's a minority of political elites who are siphoning the wealth of the country for their private benefit and at the expense of the majority of the population. And all these things, if there was to be an election and people were to, vote with these things in mind, to my mind, I think ZANU-PF wouldn't survive an election that's free and fair with their current track record.
So in your opinion, is ZANU-PF handing the election to the opposition on a silver platter?
It's the difficulty is that in Zimbabwe, elections, there's this joke that's always said that, you might not vote them, but they'll count you. Since 2000, the elections have really been suspicious. If it was a free and fair election, I would think we would be seeing the back of ZANU-PF. There is, of course, a question about whether the opposition is prepared to actually, take this election. And that is something that, to my mind, the jury is still out on that, because when you look at the opposition and, we have, I guess, the main opposition formation that had a significant chance of winning the election and challenging ZANU-PF is CCC, the Citizens Coalition for Change. However, when you look at the experience of other countries, opposition parties that have managed to dislodge a deeply entrenched ruling party normally have a couple of features. For example, they have strong party structures, they have a clear political agenda, they have a clear program of action, and this is clearly understood by their supporters. They also have a good grassroots network, and using that grassroots network, they're able to mobilize their members, across the length and breadth of the country so that they can, mobilize people to register to vote, mobilize people to get the vote out. And when you look at this, at the CCC, I don't see a lot of these key features that are required for an opposition party to actually take over power. They haven't really announced who their leaders are, what the structure of the leadership is beyond, the top 4 people that we often see. We haven't seen a manifesto. We don't really know if they've got grassroots, party structures. I mean, a simple question is, if the election is to be held in August, are they able to post election agents in all the polling stations, for example, in a ZANU-PF stronghold like Uzumba or Mudzi out in Mashonaland? Are they able to do that? And if they can't do that, they aren't able to sort of keep an eye on the elections and the way it's run so that they can make sure that everything is above board. And if they aren't able actually to defend their supporters' vote, it's unlikely that they'll be able to enter State House come, end of August.
Now, if I was to ask you if, in your mind, Nelson Chamisa, who's leader of CCC, has capacity to wrestle the initiative from Emmerson Mnangagwa, what would your reaction be to that?
So one of the things for sure, he's charismatic. If you look at him and sort of on stage versus Emmerson Mnangagwa, I mean, Chamisa is sort of far ahead in terms of charisma. He's got the energy and the charisma. In Emmerson Mnangagwa's style of oratory leaves a lot to be desired, to be honest. But I think Chamisa, one of the challenges is that I think when it comes to personality and being able to, speak in front of an audience, I think he's good, but I'm not sure about his abilities to organize a party and to bring everyone along and actually so his organizational skills are what I doubt. And I guess what is sometimes, people have commented about it. When you follow, for example, his Twitter account, he's got a lot of followers on that account, and that could be an important, an important rallying point for him to communicate with his supporters, to rally support. But every now and then, when people are expecting, a political program of action, he's tweeting Bible verses. I have nothing against Bible verses, but a political leader also needs to actually be putting out a clear political message. It's not enough to be tweeting Bible verses when people are asking for action. And that suggests to me a kind of naivety. If you're dealing with a party like ZANU-PF that has been in power for 43 years, that has actually been in power from 2017, that was a coup. Essentially a coup, and now the hold on power that ZANU-PF has is underwritten by the army. I'm afraid you're not going to be able to take over if you're tweeting Bible verses. You need to have an organized structure. You need to have grassroots networks that are able to mobilize people to get the vote out. So it's not just about prayer. It's actually about practical action on the ground. And so that's where I would say charisma 10 out of 10. A kind of pragmatic political agenda and ability to organize, I would score him below 5, to be honest.
So let's juxtapose the urban voters versus the rural voters. For the last few elections, the vote has largely been won in the rural constituencies. Has Triple C been able to move in on the rural voters, if you will, in a way that will allow them to win this election?
So, to be fair, they have tried. In a number of instances, I remember one of the trips when they were going to visit the chiefs in Manicaland. Chamisa's, the convoy of cars was shot at. And you can even Google that, the pictures online. There was a time when he was trying to get to Mashinga, to the rural areas, his convoy was stoned. So there have been a number of times when they've tried to reach out into the rural areas, and, they have been presented by ZANU-PF supporters with the use of violence. And this is quite telling, because ZANU-PF knows that if they're able to access the rural voters, and if their message starts to resonate there, then ZANU-PF is in trouble. So what you find is that, not for want of, trying, they haven't been able to do that. And this is quite deliberate on the part of ZANU-PF, because they know that once the CCC can actually break into the rural areas, it could spell the end for ZANU-PF, because everyone is struggling, and there is a deep sense amongst people that, let's try something new. These guys have been there for 43 years. I'm not sure they've got anything new that they're going to spring out of the hat, so let's try something new. And if that message was to be able to be communicated forcefully in the rural areas, I'm quite sure it would resonate with more than a few people. And I think that is why CCC is being closed out of the rural areas, even with the use of violence.
Dr. George Karekwaivanane is a senior lecturer in the Centre of African Studies at the University of Edinburgh in Scotland. I appreciate your time this evening.